Hi everyone, welcome back. We are here with another fun-filled day of science, and I'm so very excited to begin working with you again this week. I know you're at home and learning is different, but I am very excited that we're all going to be safe and you're going to be in a place where you can stay healthy and keep everybody else healthy. Okay. I am at school this week, so I will be with you um, through the interwebs, through Schoology. So please remember to check in to do your work. The learning continues, okay? So last week we learned about electricity. The week before we learned about magnets. And this week we are going to learn how those two things can come together, okay? And we're going to learn about electromagnets. Now, today I'm going to teach you about someone who's very important. And his name is Michael Faraday. Now, what he's going to do is, or what we're going to do is we're going to learn a little bit about his story, okay? And he's going to teach us what he did and what he learned through his explorations in a very early time period when science wasn't very well known. There weren't a lot of scientists, and science wasn't very popular, okay? And so let's listen to his story and then see what else we have going on for today. So this is From Rags to Riches. So this is the story of Michael Faraday. The boy looked both ways when he ran out of the alley. His shoes clapped against the cobblestones as he raced down the street. He was very late. "These books must be delivered before 5 o'clock," Mr. Dugan had said in his sternest voice. "If they're not, I won't get paid, and neither shall you." Michael Faraday did not want Mr. Dugan to be angry. Ever since he had come to work at Mr. Dugan's bookshop, things had gotten better for him. Before he had this job, Michael had spent most of his time roaming the streets with his friends. "No use going to school," he used to say. "They don't teach us anything anyway." In some ways, Michael was right. The English public schools in the early 1800s were not very good. They were poorly run, and the teachers were often harsh. The school buildings were damp and old. The small coal-burning stoves in the schools gave off little heat. There were few books, even fewer pens, and almost no paper. School was not very much fun. Michael and his friends often used to skip school. They wandered the streets of London or just hung out on street corners. Sometimes they got into trouble with the police. There was not much to do, and Michael was bored most of the time. Michael often wished school were a better place. He was very bright and inquisitive. He loved to learn new things. However, by the time he was 13, he could still not read. Think about that. 13 and he can't read. Michael knew this was not the way he wanted to get ahead in life. His father was a blacksmith who often had trouble finding enough work. The family was very poor and sometimes did not have enough to eat. Michael wanted something more from life. Then his luck changed. Michael's father sent him to work for Mr. Dugan in the bookshop. Michael noticed that successful people had something in common. They knew how to read. In fact, more and more people were learning to read. That was good news for people in the book business. Michael used his knowledge of the London streets when he worked. He delivered books faster than the other boys in the shop. Because of his hard work, Mr. Dugan let him borrow some of the books. Michael spent many hours teaching himself to read. Michael especially liked books about science. Scientists were making many new discoveries. About electricity, He convinced Mr. Dugan to let him set up a science laboratory in the back room of the bookshop. Michael conducted experiments with electricity. He kept careful notes and bound them himself in a leather-bound notebook. However, he still had to deliver books to keep his job and his laboratory. I wanted to say laboratory, but that's not really how we say that word. Michael rounded the corner onto Mulberry Street. Now all he had to do was find number 325. "There it is!" he exclaimed. Michael tramped up the steps and knocked. A man in a dark suit opened the door. Just then, Michael heard the chimes from Big Ben strike 5 o'clock. "There you are," the man said, "just in time." He gave Michael a penny as a tip and closed the door. When Michael returned to the bookstore, a customer was browsing in the science section. Mr. Dugan stood nearby as the customer thumbed through a book. The book looked familiar, but Michael did not recognize it at first. Then Mr. Dugan called Michael over to meet the customer. He introduced himself as Professor Davy. Michael recognized his name immediately. He was famous for his work with electricity. "This is a very interesting book," Professor Davy said. He held up the leather-bound notebook he was reading. Michael gasped. It was his notebook. It contained the results, so the answers, of the experiments he had conducted in his own small laboratory. "You have done some very interesting things with electricity, my boy," said the professor. "Would you like to come work for me?" Michael did not know what to say. He looked at Mr. Dugan. His employer smiled. "He's a very hard worker," said Mr. Dugan. "I think he will make a very fine assistant for you." Michael grinned and grasped his notebook. Only a few years before, he could not read. Now he was going to be an assistant to a famous professor. It was almost too good to be true. So now I'm going to read this blue box over here. And it says, "Faraday figures it out." Michael Faraday, who was alive from 1791 to 1867, continued to work very hard at his new job as assistant to Professor Davy. He eventually became a professor. He conducted many more experiments with electricity. His most famous experiment demonstrated that there is an important connection between electricity and magnetism. He showed that if you move a magnet through a coil of wire, it produces an electric current. Faraday discovered that magnetism can create electricity, and electricity can create magnetism. Okay, so here's a little diagram to help you understand what I just read. Now, think about the things you have learned about both electricity, and magnetism. Now, think about how all of that comes together. Okay? Now, posted in your folder for today are also the photos of this reading, so you can look at them again. And there's also an assignment posted. I want you to tell me 2 things today, okay, for 6 easy points. First, I want you to make a prediction about electromagnetism. Now, have I taught you about electromagnetism yet? No. I want you to make a guess. What do you think electromagnetism is? How do you think it works? Now, if you're guessing, can you be wrong? Nope, sure can't. So I would like an actual guess from you, okay? Don't say, "I don't know." Make a guess. Tell me how you think electricity and magnetism are connected, okay? Tell me what you think. Tell me how you think they work and what we can do with them. That's step 1. Step 2. Tell me something you learned about Michael Faraday. You learned quite a bit. Tell me what you understand about him. Tell me something you remember from his story. Okay? Tell me those 2 things, and you've completed your assignment for today, and your work is done. I'll also post 2 videos about series and parallel circuits if you would like to view those also. Okay? I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you again tomorrow. Goodbye, everyone.